The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. This makes resistance a moral and an existential imperative. Resistance entails suffering. It requires self-sacrifice. It accepts that we may be destroyed. It is not rational. It is not about the pursuit of happiness. It is about the pursuit of freedom. Resistance accepts that even if we fail, there is an inner freedom that comes with defiance. And perhaps this is the only freedom and true happiness we will ever know. To resist evil is the highest achievement of human life. It is the supreme act of love. It is to carry the cross, as the theologian James Cone reminds us, and to be acutely aware that what we are carrying is also what we will die upon. Most of those who resist, Sitting Bull, Emma Goldman, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, are defeated, at least in the cold calculation of the powerful. And the final and perhaps most important quality of resistance, as Cone writes, is that it inverts the world's value system. Hope rises up out of defeat. Those who resist stand regardless of the cost with the crucified. This is their magnificence, and it is their power.
Well, reducing the election to personalities is kind of infantile at this point. The fact is we live in a system that Sheldon Wolin calls inverted totalitarianism. It's a system where corporate power has seized all of the levers of control. There is no way to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs or ExxonMobil or Raytheon. We've lost our privacy. We've seen under Obama an assault against civil liberties that has outstripped what George W. Bush carried out. We've seen the executive branch misinterpret the 2001 authorization to use military force act as giving itself the right to assassinate American citizens, including children. I speak of Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son. We have bailed out the banks, pushed through programs of austerity. This has been a bipartisan effort because they've both been captured by corporate power. We have undergone what John Ralston Saul correctly calls a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, and it's over. I just came back from Poland, which is a kind of case study of how neoliberal poison destroys a society and creates figures like Trump. Poland has gone, I think we can argue, into a neo-fascism. First, it dislocated the working class, deindustrialized the country. Then, in the name of austerity, it destroyed public institutions, education, public broadcasting, and then it poisoned the political system. And we are now watching in Poland them create a 30,000 to 40,000 armed militia. They have an army. The parliament, nothing works. And I think that this political system in the United States has seized up in exactly the same form. So is Trump a repugnant personality? Yes, although I would argue that in terms of megalomania and narcissism, Hillary Clinton is not far behind. But the point is we've got to break away from, which is exactly the narrative they want us to focus on. We've got to break away from political personalities and understand and examine and critique the structures of power. And in fact, the Democratic Party, especially beginning under Bill Clinton, has carried water for corporate entities as assiduously as the Republican Party. This is something that Ralph Nader understood long before the rest of us. and stepped out very courageously in 2000. And I think we will look back on that period and find Ralph to be an amazingly prophetic figure. Nobody understands corporate power better than Ralph. And I think now people have caught up with Ralph. And this is, of course, why I support Dr. Stein and the Green Party. We have to remember that 10 years ago, Syriza, which controls the Greek government, was polling at exactly the same spot that the Green Party is polling now, about 4%. We've got to break out of this idea that we can create systematic change within a particular election cycle. We've got to be willing to step out into the political wilderness, perhaps for a decade. But on the issues of climate change, on the issue of the destruction of civil liberties, including our right to privacy, and I speak as a former investigative journalist, which doesn't exist anymore because of wholesale government surveillance. We have no ability, except for hackers. I mean, this whole debate over the WikiLeaks is insane. Did Russia? I've printed classified material that was given to me by the Mossad, but I never exposed that Mossad gave it to me. Is what was published true or untrue? And the fact is, in those long emails, you should read them. They're appalling, including calling Dr. Cornel West trash. It exposes the way the system was rigged within. I'm talking about the Democratic Party, the denial of independence, the superdelegates, the stealing of the caucus in Nevada, the huge amounts of corporate money and super PACs that flowed into the Clinton campaign. The fact is, Clinton has a track record, and it's one that has abandoned children. I mean, she and her husband destroyed welfare as we know it, and 70% of the original recipients were children. This debate over, I don't like Trump, but Trump is not the phenomena. Trump is responding to a phenomena created by neoliberalism, and we may get rid of Trump, but we will get something even more vile, maybe Ted Cruz.
You were one of the folks who did not back Bernie Sanders from the beginning. So I
didn't back Bernie Sanders because, and Shama Sawan and I had a discussion with him before, because he said that he would work within the Democratic structures and support the nominee. I think we have now watched Bernie Sanders walk away from his political moment. I think he will come to deeply regret what he has done. He has betrayed these people who believed in this political revolution. We heard the same kind of rhetoric, by the way, in 2008 around Obama. A political campaign raises consciousness, but it's not a movement. And what we are seeing now is furious spin. I listened to Ben Jealous just do it, from the self-identified liberal class. And they are tolerated within a capitalist system because in a moment like this, they are used to speak to people, to get them to betray their own interests in the name of fear. And I admire Robert and have read much of his stuff and like his stuff, but if you listen to what he's been saying, the message is the same message of the Trump campaign, and that is fear. And that is all the Democrats have to offer now and all the Republicans have to offer now. And the fact is, from climate change alone, we have no time left. I have 4 children. The future of my children by the day is being destroyed because of the fact that the fossil fuel industry, along with the animal agriculture industry, which is also as important in terms of climate change, are destroying the ecosystem on which we depend for life, and neither party has any intention to do anything about it.
What should Bernie Sanders have done?
Bernie Sanders should have walked out and run as an independent. And defied the Democratic Party.
Take up the invitation of Dr. Jill Stein and run on the ticket.
She offered to let him run on the top of the ticket. That's what he should have done. And the fact is, let's not forget that Bernie has a very checkered past. He campaigned for Clinton in '92. He campaigned for Clinton again in '96, after NAFTA, the greatest betrayal of the working class in this country since the Taft-Hartley Act of 1948. After the destruction of welfare, after the omnibus crime bill that exploded the prison population, and we now have I mean, it's just a monstrosity what we've done. 350,000 to 400,000 people locked in cages in this country are severely mentally ill. Half of them never committed a violent crime. That's all Bill Clinton, and yet he went out and campaigned. In 2004, he called on Nader not to run, to step down, so we could support a war candidate like John Kerry. And I'm listening to Jealous before talk about the Iraq War. 60% of the Democratic senators voted for the war, including Hillary Clinton. The idea that somehow Democrats don't push us into war defies American history.
Rob.
What will you do if you're the king of an empire and you rely on the slavery of your people to keep you rich and powerful? But you see your people waking up and starting to show dissent. What would you do if you wanted to stay in power? You would sure hope that they forget about it. You would want to distract them, or even better, turn them against each other, so that they forget about their original cause. The mainstream media, which we all know is in the business of maintaining the status quo, is doing a great job at doing just that. They are reducing this global transformation that's going on, this beautiful shift in human consciousness, into a petty war between each other. They will continue to create sides for us to choose from. They will keep our minds focused on skin color and uniforms. They will tell us what opinion to have about events and other people. But what they will never do is bring focus back to the message of truth and change that is trying to be born and heard through this social upheaval. Are we listening to it? Are we paying attention? Or are we falling into the trap of being divided and conquered once again? When we finally stop fighting against each other, we will gain enough perspective to see the real issue here. Now, one might say that the issue is the king of the empire, the corporate elite that is enslaving humanity. But even that is thinking too small. What is the life force of this system? Is it the small group of people calling the shots at the top of the pyramid? Or is it the 7 billion strong army of people complying? That is us. That is humanity.
You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
That's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in '79. In Guatemala it led to massive atrocities which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate. They were gaining a lot of ground, so that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which it's mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein. That takes us off to Clinton, which that's the beginning, but that's by no means the end. We can run through it. Well, we can run through that one case suffices.
All right.
But there are plenty of others.
Bush too?
Let's go on with Clinton.
Okay.
And one of Clinton's minor escapades, very minor, was sending a couple of cruise missiles to the Sudan to destroy what they knew to be a pharmaceutical plant. There was no intelligence failure. According to the only estimates we have from the German ambassador and the regional director of Near East Foundation, who does field work in Sudan, both of them estimate several tens of thousands of deaths from one cruise missile attack. It's pretty serious. If somebody did that to us, we'd regard it as bad news. And again, we can continue. In the Middle East, for example, Clinton began by declaring past UN resolutions, in the words of his administration, obsolete and anachronistic. Okay, so we're finished with that. No more international law. Then comes a period called a peace process, except that during the peace process, Israeli settlement, which means settlement paid for by the U.S. taxpayer and supported by U.S. military aid and diplomacy, continually increased. The most extreme year was Clinton's last year, the highest level of settlement, the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, the territories were cantonized, broken up into small regions with infrastructure projects and new settlement. I don't know what you call that, but it's under military occupation. And if anyone else was doing it, we'd call it a war crime. And again, we can continue. Bush too, I don't think we have to discuss.
Beep, beep, beep.
Propaganda. Many use the word when talking about countries like North Korea, Kazakhstan, Iran. Countries viewed as authoritarian through the lens of the Western media. Press freedom, freedom of thought. People use those terms when talking about countries like the United States, France, Australia, democracies. In 1988, Noam Chomsky co-authored a book with Edward Herman called Manufacturing Consent. It blasted apart the notion that media acts as a check on political power, that media inform the public, serve the public, so that we can better engage in the political process. In fact, media manufacture our consent. They tell us what those in power need them to tell us so we can fall in line. Democracy is staged with the help of media that work as propaganda machines. Media operate through 5 filters. The first has to do with ownership. Mass media firms are big corporations. Often they're part of even bigger conglomerates. Their end game, profit. And so it's in their interests to push for whatever guarantees that profit. Critical journalism takes second place to the needs and interests of the corporation. The second filter exposes the real role of advertising. Media costs a lot more than consumers will ever pay. So who fills the gap? Advertisers. And what are the advertisers paying for? Audiences. And so it isn't so much that the media are selling you a product, their output. They're also selling advertisers a product, you. How does the establishment manage the media? That's the third filter. Journalism cannot be a check on power because the very system encourages complicity. Governments, corporations, big institutions know how to play the media game. They know how to influence the news narrative. They feed media scoops, official accounts, interviews with the experts. They make themselves crucial to the process of journalism. So those in power and those who report on them are in bed with each other. If you want to challenge power, you'll be pushed to the margins. Your name won't be down. You won't be getting in. You've lost your access. You've lost the story. When the media, journalists, whistleblowers, sources, stray away from the consensus, they get flagged. That's the fourth filter. When the story is inconvenient for the powers that be, you'll see the flak machine in action, discrediting sources, trashing stories, and diverting the conversation. To manufacture consent, you need an enemy, a target. That common enemy is the fifth filter. Communism, terrorists, immigrants, a common enemy. A boogeyman to fear helps corral public opinion. 5 filters, one big media theory. Consent is being manufactured all around you, all the time.
Biddy-boo, biddy-boo-biddy-boo.
After the Second World War, when Russian tanks came into Czechoslovakia, they were welcomed with cheers and gratefulness for liberating the country from the Nazis. The Communist Party took advantage of that feeling and gained a plurality of 38% in the first post-war elections and formed a coalition government with other left-wing parties. In February 1948, however, the Communist Party staged a coup d'etat and 40 years of totalitarian rule ensued. On the evening of November 17th, thousands of students marched without incident on the designated route, but as more and more people of all ages joined, the focus of the demonstration shifted to discontent with current politics, and an increasing number of people started holding up anti-government signs and shouting phrases against the leaders of the Communist Party. They peacefully walked with candles, singing songs about freedom and shouting slogans. But soon, the protesters encountered the police, who created a blockade from both sides, preventing them from continuing or leaving.
That was the time when the police started to beat everyone. Everyone was shouting, crying. When we managed to escape, we saw some people laying on the ground, and also there was lots of blood. That was really terrible.
To students who attended the rally, and to citizens of Prague, this event seemed monumental because of the unprecedented police brutality. However, because of the state-controlled media, people in the majority of the country were at first skeptical or completely unaware of what had occurred. The following day, the student unions organized a strike for all the Prague universities, and later that day, all the theaters in Prague joined the students to create awareness of what had happened. None of the theaters gave their performances, and instead the audience took part in discussions, sharing their experiences and urging others to protest.
My už dneska nesmíme tu šanci pustit. My musíme věřit. Když ne nikomu, tak tomu občanskému fóru, to je přece strašně rozhodující a důležitá věc, to fórum.
Václav Havel, a playwright and dissident who had only been released from jail a few weeks prior, helped utilize the anger people felt because of the police brutality and long years of a controlling regime and transfer it into something concrete and productive. He combined Charter 77 and other anti-government groups to form the Občanské fórum, or Civic Forum, which was composed of actors, students, dissidents, and ordinary people. The Civic Forum became the platform of opposition to the Communist Party and eventually successfully negotiated a non-violent transition of power. There was a saying popularized by Havel about the length of revolutions in Europe. In Poland it took 10 years, in Hungary 10 months, in East Germany 10 weeks. Perhaps in Czechoslovakia it will take 10 days. Although the complete revolution in Czechoslovakia took longer than 10 days, the spirit of enthusiasm remained. Over the course of the weeks following the demonstration on the 17th, foreign news reporters broadcasted the Velvet Revolution to the entire world. However, in order to let the Czech public know what was happening, the students created pamphlets, leaflets, and posters. The term Velvet Revolution was most likely coined by Western journalists to symbolize a peaceful, negotiated regime change. In Prague, there were daily protests, and communist leaders who encountered resistance among people tried desperately to maintain a semblance of order.
V žádné zemi ani rozvojové, ani v socialistické, ani v kapitalistické neexistuje to, aby 15letí děti určovali, kdy má odejít prezident nebo kdy má přijít a kdo jim má být. The Czechoslovak Communist Party had observed the crumbling of communist regimes all over Europe, and without the support of the Soviet Union, there was great uncertainty of how to react to the rallying public. People congregated, talked about solutions, and most of all didn't lose hope. At one of the rallies, Marta Kubišová, who had written a song opposing the invasion of tanks in '68, sang the same iconic song about freedom. The song became a staple to this revolution as well, and would be sung many times after. On November 24th, the top leaders of the Communist Party resigned. Without the support of the Soviet Union, and with other former communist countries declaring democracy, the Czechoslovak Communist Party experienced inner turmoil. Along with the inability to form a coherent party and the encounter of nationwide protest, the Communist Party was left with no option but to resign. Gradually, the terms proposed by the Civic Forum were accepted by the government. The political prisoners were released, the government was renewed, and the free elections were planned for the following June.
All the people were dancing there, shouting, really in tears that this really happened and we succeeded.
The communists sensed their defeat, so in December, the parliament unanimously elected Václav Havel, the leader of the Civic Forum and arguably the entire Velvet Revolution, as the president. When the communist regime encountered overwhelming public protest and an uncertain geopolitical climate, it was unable to adapt and was left no choice but to peacefully transition power to the democratic protest movement. The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, through nonviolent action and mass protest, became the model for other countries which attempted their own revolutions. It became a precedent and showed the true power of the people and what they can accomplish without resorting to violence. Current and future revolutions have the potential to take inspiration from the Velvet Revolution and create a peaceful exchange of power, providing hope for the future of our world.
Neoliberalism is a term for the political and economic policies associated with unrestrained free market global capitalism. The term was popularized in the 1980s by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and economist Milton Friedman, and is still prominent today. Proponents of neoliberalism see free markets and free trade as a foundation for human flourishing, creating the most favorable conditions for individual liberties, job growth, technological innovation, and transnational collaborations that promote peace and global prosperity. They believe that government interference with free market systems promotes waste, inefficiency, and stagnation. They reject regulations on industries, high taxation, and public services that are not subject to market competition, and believe in shrinking the size of government and restricting its functions to the protection of private property through policies and law enforcement, the facilitation of global commerce, and the maintenance of a strong military. Critics of neoliberalism argue that neoliberal policies exacerbate rather than mitigate economic and social inequalities. They cite the effects of unregulated capitalism and the reduction or removal of safety nets typically provided by governments to support those who are economically and socially vulnerable. More fundamentally, many critics assert that neoliberalism fails to account for structural forms of violence, such as systemic poverty, racism, and other forms of discrimination. They argue that these hinder equal access to the benefits of free market capitalism that neoliberals imply are universally shared. By failing to acknowledge structural forms of oppression, many neoliberals assert that it is individual failings rather than systemic inequality that lead to social and economic vulnerability. As with other political and economic systems, religions function to both support and challenge neoliberalism in local, national, and global contexts.
So where does that leave us? It leaves us as being realistic about the fact that we cannot, and American people have never been able to, in the past, historically, look to any president to save them. But it's interesting that we're supposed to be in a democracy, and yet here we are in a democracy and you look for saviors. No, presidents are not going to save us. Congressmen, Supreme Court, they're not going to save us. Historically, Americans have been saved from the worst injustices only when they have organized and they have created movements, and those movements have created, I have to say, a turmoil in the country, as in the 30s and the 60s, and only then have presidents been moved to act. Only then have Congress has been moved to act, and that's what we are going to need in this coming period if we are going to get out of the morass that we have been left in and that we are not yet beginning to extricate ourselves from. Thank you. I would declare that we are not going to be an aggressive war-making power anymore. We are going to dismantle the military bases we have in 100 countries. Those bases are not protecting us. All that they are doing is inflaming people's anger in all those places where we have bases and giving enormous profits to the corporations that make money from the maintenance of these bases. I am going to take the money that we are going to save by cutting our military budget very, very drastically. I'm going to take that, and then we are going to have several $1 trillion available, several $1 trillion available to give everybody free health care, not through insurance companies, not to the kind of health program that they have in many other countries which have better health systems than we do, and where everybody has free health care. You don't have to fill out forms, and you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. In other words, we're going to give everybody the kind of health care that people in the military have, that people in the Congress have. And let me say something as president to you, because this has not been said by any president for quite a while, and that is that don't be afraid of what they call big government. Big government is what we have always had in this country from the beginning. From the time the Constitution was created, we have had big government, strong central government. That's what the Constitution set up. But that government has generally acted on behalf of the wealthy classes. And when it has acted on behalf of the wealthy classes, it was not called big government. When the government began to do things for poor people, then the cry went up, big government. Big government is Social Security, which is a very efficient, helpful thing. Big government was the GI Bill of Rights, which gave college education to millions of people. Yes, and we can have big government in health, and don't worry about it. If you don't have big government, you will have big corporations. And you have much less power over corporations than over government, where at least you can vote for government. You don't vote for corporations. So